but I've just been at Linus's event, and it's very clear from the people I met at that event, my audience is wide-ranging. Everyone from people who don't know a thing about microarchitecture, but are really interested in computing, all the way up to the key engineers in our industry. Now, if you've followed this channel for a long time, you'll know that every year there's one conference I always put above all others. This conference is called Hot Chips. It's the opportunity for the community, for the industry, to talk about the latest chips in the market that everyone is ready to get excited about. And I believe all of you should follow along. In this video, we're going to go through the program of talks that are set to go on at Hot Chips at the end of August. So stay tuned, because there's going to be a few good fun ones in here. A lot of the content on this channel wouldn't be possible without you, the supporters. Many thanks to all who support. And if you're interested in supporting, then we have Patreon, we have a merch store, I have a Substack newsletter, or simply just like and subscribe. It really does help out the channel. So Hot Chips this year is being held on the 27th, 28th and 29th of August at Stanford. It's usually in the Bay Area. This year they're going for a hybrid design, so part online, part in person. Last year was fully online, and the year before that due to the pandemic. However, this time they're going for a more hybrid approach. As somebody who's actually been on site at pretty much all of them since I was allowed to go to Hot Chips, I fully recommend being on site if you can make it. Otherwise, online passes are still plenty available to get. If I look at the pricing, tops are around about $200 to $250, depending on whether you're an IEEE member and whether you book before August 11th, which is the early bird special period. What Hot Chips does is it breaks down into 3 days. The first day is a tutorial day where it picks 2 key topics from the industry to cover in depth across the morning and then the afternoon. Following that, you have 2 days of talks, usually split into 4 sections per day, and each section has anywhere from 2 to 5 talks, ranging for about 30 minutes on that topic from key industry players, plus a few startups doing something really interesting, and then perhaps a couple of academics as well. And then each day has at least 1, if not 2 keynotes, usually headed up by a really senior member of the chip design space, going into either their career or a key topic in the industry right now, or a key product in the industry right now that they've been working on. In this overview, we're going to cover what those 3 days are going to be like, who's talking, and why it's all important. So let's start with day 1, tutorial day. So tutorial day starts at 8 a.m. With breakfast and registration. Usually the tutorial day Sunday is pretty relaxed right at the beginning, but the first session for the morning is going to be on machine learning inference. So we know that machine learning is split into training and inference is kind of like what we expect to be the massive workload going forward. Everybody talks about the large models you train across tons of GPUs. Inference is what that trained model essentially runs on to get the output, and the vision is that even though training these models gets more expensive, requires a lot more complex hardware, most of the energy and most of the money is going to end up on inference. So inference is really important, especially as we look to optimize inference models for compute per watt, and compute per dollar. So start off, we have a talk by Micah Vilmo from NVIDIA, just doing a general overview of machine learning inference, and there's obviously going to be a small NVIDIA bent on that. Then we've got Microsoft accelerating machine learning inference with Microsoft DeepSpeed, which is their own tool, kind of introducing the attendees to that. And then inference at the edge from Felix Baum at Qualcomm. Now, inference at the edge just simply means stuff that's either happening on your devices, like your smartphone or your Alexa, or stuff that's happening in a telecommunications network near to you rather than back in the data center. Essentially, everything that's not data center is typically called edge, though we normally focus it more on devices. So we're going to have machine learning inference at the edge. That's going to be pretty important. Each of those, it's scheduled 2 hours for those 3 talks, so I guess about 40 minutes each. Then we move into a coffee break, very important for this sort of stuff. Then at 11:30, we have another session, which is continuing on machine learning inference. We've got 1 TBD. It looks like somebody's pulled out. But then following on that, we have an introduction to PyTorch 2.0 from Meta, essentially the machine learning framework that most people are going to use when it comes to machine learning. And then Moffat AI, which is one of these AI startups that actually showcased their hardware, I think at Hot Chips last year, their Antum architecture. We're going to have a portion of the AI hardware show based on that chip. But they're looking at hardware requirements for sparsity in inference. People talk a lot about sparsity in training. In inference, it means a lot as well, because again, you improve performance per dollar, and performance per watt if you could apply it into your machine learning model. After that session, we have lunch, which is a good hour and 15 minutes. For those on site, lunch is provided. And then we move on to the second topic, second training topic of the day, chiplets and Universal Chiplet Interconnect Protocol, so UCIe. And we're going to have essentially all the big players here talking about UCIe. Overview and usage models is going to be the first talk for Brenda from Intel and Nathan from AMD. So Intel and AMD getting together for an industry effort on a talk about hot chips. This is the sort of thing that hot chips provides, which is really fun. So simply put, overview and usage models. And then the second talk in that session, looks like they're going to be an hour each, is just simply going to be on the protocol. And that's going to be from Intel and NVIDIA. Swadesh from Intel and Marvin from NVIDIA. Those of you who have been following UCIe very closely might not get anything new out of that. However, it is meant to be a tutorial session, so it brings everybody up to speed. And usually these tutorial sessions go down really well with a Hot Chips audience. And then coffee break, and then another, the timing's a little bit wrong here, but another 2 hours. They're going to talk about the more physical aspect of it, so electrical form factor and compliance, again, AMD and Intel, Anwar from AMD, Gerald from Intel. And then software manageability and security, so looking more at the, just beyond the physical protocol and the electrical protocol into the software, from Jerome from Google and Sridhar from Intel. So the fact that we've got AMD, Intel, NVIDIA, and Google all talking about UCIe, and you can imagine anyone who's creating customized chiplets is also looking at UCIe. I work with a few of those companies, so they will definitely be in the audience, making sure that they're all up to speed personally, and if there's any sort of insights they can glean. And then we have an evening reception for those on site. It's a chance to essentially meet, greet, walk around, have a chat, maybe some food. Sometimes they put out ice cream for that sort of thing. But that kind of ends the tutorial day one. It usually costs a little bit extra to attend the tutorials, I think. I think they're very well worth at least going and being present if you just happen to be in the area. From a media standpoint, it helps us bring our level of knowledge back up to a good level, so we can quiz the companies who are doing this. And obviously, things like machine learning, massive industry, things like chiplets and UCIe, and up and coming, already commercialized to a certain extent, but an up and coming important standard in the industry that's going to need to be looked at going forward. So let's go into the conference day one, Monday, August 28th. It's going to start pretty early, 8:45. No breakfast provided today, but there will be coffee on site. There usually is. And then we start with the first day one keynote. It's really good that they put the keynotes first, because it means people turn up. So 9 a.m. for an hour, exciting directions for machine learning models and implications for computing hardware. This is going to be Jeff Dean and Amin Vedat from Google. So this is probably going to be a deep dive into how Google sees the machine learning model at the hardware space. Hot Chips is normally a hardware conference. So I'm not too sure what to expect from that. Jeff Dean I've obviously heard of. Amin Vedat, unfortunately, I haven't. But these keynotes usually... Keynotes are sometimes 50-50. Last year, we had a keynote at Hot Chips that was from the government that didn't go down too well. So they're trying to keep them more to being optimized for the compute problems that we're discussing today. So that could potentially be a good one. There's the first proper session of the day is going to be processing and memory, so the mixture of compute and memory all in one. So 10 to 11, so we're going to have half an hour each. One on the memory-centric computing with SK Hynix, domain-specific memory. That's going to be from Yongki Kwon from SK Hynix. So in the past, I think on this channel I've covered, or at least I have definitely been briefed on Samsung's processing and memory, their HBM. This is going to be SK Hynix's solution, and how they're going to approach that from a hardware perspective, but also a software perspective. Second talk is going to be Samsung's AI cluster system with the HBM PIM, which I just was talking about, and CXL-based processing near memory for transformer-based LLMs. So this is Jin Hyun Kim from Samsung. This is going to be more bent towards machine learning, but processing and memory with machine learning, which is obviously where a lot of these high-performance memory and computer memory technologies. The fact that it's called processing and memory, memory-centric computing, computer memory, there's like a whole scale here I could probably do a video about, which regards to exactly where on the scale these things are. But it's pretty much all the same thing. How can you minimize data movement and do processing either right next to the memory cell, or even add adders and multipliers to the memory cells themselves. And different people are approaching it in different ways. And so it's good to have SK Hynix and Samsung on site. Hopefully they'll be on site to come and answer questions. Then we have a coffee break and we go straight into the first CPU session, hour and a half, 3 talks. First talk, ARM Neoverse V2 from Magnus Bruce at ARM. Neoverse, for those who don't know, is essentially their enterprise core platform from ARM. This is what we're seeing in a lot of the high-end enterprise ARM chips. Neoverse either V1 or N1, and now we're going into V2 and N2. These V is for performance, N is for networking, so Neoverse V2 here is the performance chip. And it's leadership, performance, and power efficiency for next-generation cloud computing, machine learning, and HPC workloads. So apparently you can design a core and have it all. This is what ARM seems to be going for. Then the second talk is from AMD, from Kai Troster, AMD's next generation Zen 4, which we've covered extensively on this channel, and 4th gen AMD EPYC, the 9004 server CPUs. Typically when AMD does these talks, it's pretty much it's a good rehash of their silicon, bringing everybody up to speed, and also with the product family. So in this case, it's the Genoa server EPYC platform. So I'm not sure we'll hear anything new out of that talk, but it'd be good to bring everybody back up to the same level. And then here's a talk I'm really going to be interested in. Third is Ventana Micro. So this is one of these RISC-V based high-performance startups, kind of like Tenstorrent and a few others. They're showcasing their Veyron V1 CPU, their data center class RISC-V processor, and that's going to be presented by Greg Favor from Ventana. Hopefully that's going to be a good one. They'll go into the microarchitecture of that core, showcase where they're getting performance, and if we're lucky, we'll see a bunch of simulation data, performance expectations, power, and maybe even silicon. I'm just starting to get involved with Ventana Micro, understanding their product portfolio and where they sit. I actually need to follow up on a few emails. Sorry, Greg, I know you're waiting for those. But yeah, it's important if you're interested in RISC-V and how it's going to be in the data center for high performance. This is going to be one of the main players going after that. Then we have lunch, hour and a quarter. That's pretty nice. Lunch, usually there's never enough time for lunch because it's also a networking session, of course. And then we have a 2-hour session called Platforms. So this is kind of a mixture of CPU and everything else as well. And the first talk here is going to be Intel, Chris Gianos from Intel, speaking about architecting for flexibility and value with future Intel Xeon processors. So we just had, obviously, a launch of Sapphire Rapids, and then going forward, we've got Granite Rapids, Emerald Rapids, and all the other Rapids going forward. This may be an opportunity for Intel to start talking about their all-E-core platform, Sierra Forest, which is due early next year, or the fact that it says future makes me hopeful that they're going to talk about Granite Rapids and Sierra Forest and maybe Clearwater Forest, again, another E-core CPU along that roadmap. That would be a good chance for them to start talking about that, how they're dealing with the mesh, how they're dealing with the chiplets, and how that is going forward. So we should get some new information out of that talk, so I'm going to be quite interested. Next on is ARM, and they're going to talk about CSS Genesis, ARM's Neoverse N2 platform. So we had V2 in the previous session. We're going to have N2. N2 is more focused towards networking and infrastructure. You can't really call it the equivalent of like a high performance core, an efficiency core, a P-core, E-core, or if you really want to go down the big, little, or dynamic, or however you want. But Neoverse N2, the N1 was in a fair amount of processors, especially in the networking space, sometimes in the compute space. N2 should be the next evolution of that. So that's going to be interesting, getting a deeper dive into Neoverse N2 and see how it differs to the consumer platforms. Third talk in this session is the power management architecture of Intel's Meteor Lake. Now, Meteor Lake, for those who aren't up to date, is going to be the next generation Intel processor based on chiplets or tiles, or however you want to call it. But they're using a mix of 2D and 3D stacking in that with tiles, chiplets from different fabs. And one of the problems there is how you build them together, how you manage the performance, and how you manage the power. So having a deeper understanding of the power management of that chip is going to be really fun to find out about. That's from Ephraim Rotem from Intel. I believe he's part of the Intel Israel team. So yeah, I'm expecting some new information in that talk as well. So yeah, in terms of day one, this seems to be like, the session to keep track of. And then finally in the session, we have a talk from Bharat Pilili, sorry if I pronounced that incorrectly, from Microsoft. Calyptra, an open source root of trust for measurements. So now we're getting into how we design CPU cores for better internal measurement to help detect how we get the better performance ratio, how we optimize for performance inside a CPU. But I guess assuming also security and failures and monitoring and all that jazz. So that should be interesting and fun if you're into that sort of thing. Then we go into another half-hour coffee break, and the last session of the day, 3 talks. It's a CPU2 session, and they're only ending the day at 6:15. Thankfully, the Hot Chips Committee aren't ending these days at 8 p.m. anymore, thank God. But the first talk is going to be Intel Xeon processors built on the efficiency core, the E-core. Next generation of high-performance energy-efficient computing. This is Don Soltis at Intel. So this is probably where we're going to see Sierra Forest and Clearwater Forest. So if you've had Xeon based on E-cores, yeah, it's got to be a talk about the Forest family, getting deeper insights into how they're going to do their 144-core E-cores, Sierra Forest, coming out beginning of next year. Yeah, looking forward to a deeper dive on that. Should be some new information too. Second talk in that session, AMD Ryzen 7040 series mobile processor from Mahesh Subramani from AMD. So 7040 has already been launched. Or the key element to know about 7040 is that it contains a Xilinx AI engine in the SoC, which is limited to certain OEMs, limited to certain software products. It's not freely available for everyone to use. It's just select partners. But we're already seeing Microsoft apply it into laptops with that processor. To do things like camera background blurring, and a nascent form of eye gaze correction, that sort of stuff. Basically, AMD processors, low power. Here, I'd highlight PC World. I've done a couple of videos on this, looking at performance and power and utility. You should definitely go check those out. But this should be a more technical explanation of how that works. So I'm looking forward to that. Then the last talk of the day, detailed architecture analysis and key features of Sci5's latest high-performance out-of-order vector processor. So Sci5, a RISC-V IP house, they're obviously developing high-performance scalar and high-performance vector processors. So it's going to be interesting to hear about that. They've announced the X280. They announced that last year, so maybe this is the next generation beyond that, the X380. So it'll be interesting to hear how they're doing that compared to what we're already seeing from Ventana earlier in the day with RISC-V and what we already know about Tenstorrent Torrance Ascalon core. But yeah, end of the day, 6:15. That's pretty good. Again, dinner not provided. That's up to you. And then just general networking. Then we move on to day 2. This is Tuesday, August 29th. And start of the day, 30 minutes, 8:30. This is something new they're trying. It's the poster lightning talk. So as part of this conference, they have a poster session where they have anywhere between 10 and 20 posters, either from academia or from different companies in the space. And they used to just be held outside the hall, and you can go and read them any time and talk to the people if they're nearby if you have any questions. This is a chance for them now to actually go through and present on stage, though it is going to be early morning. I do wonder how many people are going to rock up for that. And then the start of the full-on talks today, we have the second keynote of the event. Again, starting early, that's nice and good. Hardware for Deep Learning by Bill Daly at NVIDIA. So that's obviously going to go into NVIDIA's hardware strategy, hopefully, and not just talk about current hardware. Maybe we'll learn more about Hopper next. But it's going to be a more of an overview, I think, about the industry and deep learning rather than necessarily NVIDIA focus. That's what these keynotes tend to be like. And then the first actual session of the day is going to be on machine learning training. So yeah, there's going to be a strong machine learning focus, obviously. More often than not, we typically see machine learning training at Hot Chips, but they're really pushing the machine learning inference this year. And so this first session is going to be on machine learning training. And then we have machine learning inference later in the day. So machine learning training, first up is Google. So a machine learning supercomputer with an optically reconfigurable interconnect and embedding support. So Google has showcased papers, I think their system is called Jupyter, correct me if I'm wrong, where they're dealing with essentially optical networking, but also the switch is optical. So I'm not sure whether this is training that should be in interconnects or it should be in networking, but they're using that for training. And how can they speed up what is essentially some of the biggest lag in training today? And that's how you manage the connectivity between having such a large number of accelerators going over your data set. So we should see some fun stuff there. And then we have a talk from Cerebras from Sean Lee inside the Cerebras wafer scale cluster. So you may have seen my video on Andromeda from Cerebras. That's their 16 wafer scale engine design. They've also now sold 64 supercomputers with 64 wafer scale engines to their strategic partner G2 in the Arab Emirates. So we may hear a little bit about that. I fully expect this is going to be more focused on that 16 wafer system Andromeda that they've currently got up in Colavar right now. Then a good half-hour coffee break after 2 hours of talks. Then we go into the interconnects. Now, before Hot Chips is usually a conference called Hot Interconnects. We don't typically cover it that much, just because it tends to be a bit more deeper in the weeds than most. However, there is an interconnect session here, hour and a half, 3 talks. First one is going to be NVIDIA's Resource Fungible Network Processing ASIC. This is Omar Shabtai from NVIDIA. This is going to be from obviously the Mellanox acquisition, the Fungible acquisition actually. So we're going to see about their optimized networking ASICs that essentially take the load off the CPU and you can do smart stuff with your networking. There's a whole industry about smart NICs and ASICs built for networking, between dumb network controllers all the way up to we process a ton of stuff and you actually have to budget for the power these consume. But the benefit is you don't use all the CPU cores in your CPU without networking. So it'll be interesting to hear from them. Then we have a talk from Lightelligence, Maurice Steinman, Hummingbird Low Latency Computing Engine. So this is going to be interesting. If you've watched the channel, you may have heard of Light Matter and their Mars optical processor. This is essentially their main competitor, Lightelligence, with their optical compute processor called Hummingbird. And it's a low latency computing engine. So it'll be interesting to see how they're doing with optical compute. I'm quite skeptical about optical compute just because of how phase shifts work and propagation of light in those meshes. So, really interesting to hear about that, and maybe I'll get to speak to Maurice afterwards as well. And then the third talk of this session is to Jason Howard, Intel, the first direct mesh-to-mesh photonic fabric. This is going to be good because Intel's showcased many sort of 3D visualizations of what an optical mesh, an optical network inside the data center would look like, where you're directly connecting Xeons using in-package chiplets and optical connections. Intel announced that they have pluggable optics now, or at least they've found a way to do it and do it reliably. The question is, can they bring it to volume? So maybe Jason's going to go into that detail as well, and then go into the technical details of having an optical fabric. Going at the speed of light is fun. So, and then we have an hour and a quarter for lunch. Again, if you're on site, lunch is provided. And then we go into the machine learning inference section, or set of talks. 2 hours, 4 talks, starting off with IBM and IBM's North Pole Neural Inference Machine. This must be their AIU. North Pole must be the code name for that. So I might get a deeper dive into the architecture here. So that should be fun. And then Moffett, and here they're going to be talking about their architecture, the Moffett Antum, in deeper detail. So it's a deep sparse AI inference system on chip for vision and large language models. So again, their chip is focused purely on exploiting multiple levels of sparsity. So we're going to go into a deep dive there. Now, this next talk is going to be one of the key ones of the day, because I'm hoping that they go into a massive amount of detail. So Eric Mahurin from Qualcomm, they're going to be talking about the Qualcomm Hexagon Tensor processor. So this is their machine learning DSP AI accelerator that they put into the smartphone SoCs. Qualcomm's historically been very quiet about what they put in there. We managed to gather a few things as machine learning's been put in, but in terms of what they do with DSPs or not, hopefully Eric's going to go into a lot of detail here, and we're going to find out exactly what their architecture is, how they're managing to deal with, say, int4 and int8 and all the different quantization levels for machine learning. And then following that, we have a company I've not heard of, but is called Numenta, Lawrence Bracken, supercharged GPT inference on modern CPUs. So it looks like a potential software acceleration solution to do GPT on modern CPUs. Whether that's x86 or ARM, we're going to have to find out and go to the talk. And then a final coffee break of the day, half an hour, and then we go to the final session, 3 talks on FPGAs and cooling, which is a bit of a weird mix, but it is what it is. First talk of the day is AMD's next generation FPGA built from chiplets. So obviously this is Xilinx acquisition. This is Dinesh Gaitonde from AMD. They just announced the successor to the VU19P on the FPGA side, which is the big simulation FPGA. So either that's going to be about that next upgrade, or it's going to be beyond that. And Xilinx's massive FPGAs are literally massive. They're usually at the forefront of packaging as well. And they've done chiplets before, but this is obviously going to be next level chiplets, so that's going to be fun. Then the second talk is going to be Intel's Agilex 9. This is by Benjamin Esposito, Intel. This is obviously from the Altera acquisition. Now, I've criticized Intel's Agilex in the past just because there's been very little info about it. They've not had a really good messaging strategy. I actually spoke to somebody about I spoke to somebody at the DAC conference a couple of weeks ago about this. So we're hoping that they're going to get more involved with the FPGA space and actually bring out more information about it. This is Agilex 9. This is the big FPGAs, direct RF FPGAs with integrated 64 GSPS data converters. So they're going for high performance, they're going for configurability, and they're also going for some hardened silicon here. So it's going to be interesting to hear about that. And then the final talk of the event is going to be from Ian Winfield at Fabric 8 Labs, high performance cold plates for data center thermal management via electrochemical additive manufacturing, or ECAM. So this is essentially how do you bond a really efficient high performance cold plate to a processor for data center thermal management. That's going to be an interesting talk. They've obviously got some IP there that they can integrate at the fab level or at the packaging level. There's a lot of ways that can go round, and it's a cold plate. So obviously we're talking about liquid cooling here. So that's the end of the conference essentially. They've got the poster sessions. They've got the posters, what they're going to come up with, post on the wall. This poster list is actually about half as long as what it normally is. I mean, we've got Secure Enclave for Azure and AWS, 130 nanometer open source IC for real-time millimeter wave compensation, scalable multi-chip deep learning accelerator, accelerating hyperscale models for generative AI, ML Simmer.ai's ML SoC architecture, SoC Bluetooth for Bluetooth low energy and 28 nanometer, all this sort of stuff that typically goes into the post sessions. It's from a mixture of companies and academics. Overall, from Hot Chips, I think there's at least 2 or 3 key talks. I think we have the opportunity to learn a lot more about some of the deeper architectures that are going on here. It's going to be especially important for those in the industry and also for investors in understanding where the direction of the industry is going. For what it's worth, for those of you who have come to the end of this video and you're like, well, I'm not really interested in architecture. I like learning about chips. I like learning about products, but I have no information about architecture. The funny thing is, I've actually managed to get a few people, a mixture of students and colleagues, people who aren't architecture focused, just to come and just to come and watch a few of these talks during the event. And even though they don't follow it word for word, the level of detail that these people can go into in these talks, I can tell that they pick up snippets. And it's interesting to see the people who watch these talks over time, over the years, they get more snippets in their memory and they start putting things together and they start doing their own internal mental inference about how everything interconnects together. So don't worry that you have to be actively involved in understanding every one of these talks. I mean, heck, I'm not, for sure. There's some of the stuff that's going to go way over my head. But I'm going to sit there and I'm going to at least passively learn and take stuff in and let my old brain noodle on it for a while and see what comes out. For those of you asking what exactly I'm going to do with regards to coverage at Hot Chips, because in the last couple of years when it's been remote, I've done 8-hour, 10-hour live streams with you all, for those of you who had tickets and could watch, and we had sort of like a conversational thing going on. I'm going to be on site for this Hot Chips. I'm actually going to be landing, coming in from Asia on tutorial day, so I'm going to actually miss the first tutorial, if not the second, just due to jet lag. So exactly what I'm going to end up doing during the conference, I haven't actually decided. Live blog is going to be, I'm not sure where that would go up, and doing a live stream was obviously going to be difficult if I'm actually at the event. maybe it's a case of using the opportunity to do a few interviews with some of the people, or maybe if anybody who's actually presenting Hot Chips wants to reach out and give me a pre-briefing, so perhaps I can record something in advance, then please do let me know. Either contact through Twitter, or there's an email address on the TechTechPotato about page. Please do get in touch, or speak to your analyst relations or press relations. They probably know who I am, and we can reach out and have a chat that way. Definitely interested in learning what everyone has got to say. A lot of what this information is, and Hot Chips going forward. It's a really important industry, and I'm looking forward to it. And I hope you guys sign up. I have no financial interest in sign-ups to Hot Chips, but it really is one of the most affordable and accessible conferences that we have out there, that goes deep into the architecture, that's not affected in any way by sponsors paying for keynotes or anything. It is generally for people who love architecture, love talking about this stuff, and love the industry. My only wish in future is that Apple actually did some presentations rather than merely just attending. You know who you are.